OK, let's start with the new Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, making it clear that he wants July 19th to be the day that we get our freedoms back. Let's have a listen.
People and businesses need certainty, so we want every step to be irreversible. And make no mistake, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the restrictions on our freedoms, they must come to an end. We owe it to the British people, who have sacrificed so much to restore their freedoms as quickly as we possibly can, and not to wait a moment longer than we need to. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, with the numbers heading in the right direction, all while we protect more and more people each day, July the 19th remains our target date. The Prime Minister has called it our terminus date. For me, 19th July is not only the end of the line, but the start of an exciting new journey for our country. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, at this crucial moment in our fight back against this pandemic, we must keep our resolve and keep on our roadmap to freedom, so that together we can beat this pandemic and we can build back better. It is a task that I am deeply honoured to lead, and one I know will succeed.
So the big question is, has Sajid Javid's appointment changed public opinion? Are people now in favour? And we know the public have somewhat been a bit cautious about restrictions, now in favour of ensuring that on the 19th all restrictions are lifted. Well, delighted to say we're joined by the Conservative MP Steve Baker, who's the Deputy Chair of the COVID Recovery Group. Good morning to you, Steve.
Good morning.
Hello. First of all, it does feel like we've somewhat been here before, albeit with a different minister, Matt Hancock. There was much talk, wasn't there, before that date in June that the data was looking pretty good up until the last minute. Are you confident that with a new Health Secretary things are going to change?
Well, I am confident about Sajid's direction of travel. I think we all know that Sajid wants us to be free, and he meant what he said yesterday. But you're right, we have been here before. And actually there was a slight worsening of the position in what Sajid said, because Matt Hancock told me the reason that step 4 wasn't in the regulations was because it was freedom from the regulations. That's not quite what Sajid said. So now we're waiting to see what step 4 will really mean. So,
and of course, Boris Johnson yesterday said, that it was looking good to lift the restrictions as far as possible, which also gives the impression that things like mask wearing, for example, might remain in place even if the other restrictions are lifted.
I think we're all counting on Sajid to take the difficult decision when it comes to avoid future lockdowns. So he's bound to be shown all of the horror stories on every side of this question. But thank goodness today I think we're starting to see an ending of the tunnel vision which has characterised this crisis, with the Children's Commissioner coming out and talking about the harm to children of bubbles and continued restrictions. I think we're now starting to see we need to take a broader picture, and I really hope that's what Sajid does.
Yeah, good. I was just about to talk to you as a parent. I think it's great news that, that we don't have bubbles, that we, if children come into contact with somebody who's got COVID or been around, that they're not sent home for 10 days. I mean, this has got to be good news going forward.
It must be good news, but this is really the key test, is when test and trace is shut down. When we are really living with coronavirus as we live with flu, knowing it's dangerous, vaccinating the vulnerable, but actually getting on with our lives. But parents have clearly had a miserable time. I know there was one account in the Telegraph of somebody isolating their child for the 7th time. They're also reporting that per child, over half a school year has been lost on average. And this is extraordinary.
Well, it is. I mean, we were talking to somebody earlier on the programme, and having to send 200 kids home. I mean, this isn't on, is it?
It can't be on, and it must have a long-term repercussion for them all, and not just on their learning, but also on their ability to socialise, to make friends and to have fun. I mean, the psychological harm I'm not qualified to comment on, but it must be adverse.
What I don't understand is, I know there's only a couple of days, a week left, or a couple of weeks left for most kids in England on this. Why just not do it now? Why not just go... Look, we all kind of agree, it seems, that everyone thinks this doesn't make sense anymore. Why are we waiting?
I think it's, to speak for them, I think it's because they're desperately concerned to increase the number of vaccinations amongst adults. We're up at, I think it's about 84% of adults have had their first dose, 62 their second. So we're doing incredibly well, but we do need to finish the job. But we have to ask questions about whether children were ever really material to hospitalisations and deaths. And this research needs to be done and done seriously.
Just very finally on this bit of it, what would you say to viewers out there, and I'm sure there are some of them, because we know the public have been quite cautious on the rules and regulations, what would you say to people who are still concerned that, with infections rising, that they're concerned that we're moving too quickly. How do you address those concerns?
Well, it's got to be the government that leads that addressing of those concerns.
Do you think they've frightened people too much?
Absolutely they have, yes. Throughout the pandemic, we know that the government's own advisors have told a book author that the techniques used have been unethical and smacked of totalitarianism, in the government advisor's own words. So we need to look really seriously at what's been done. But people are not fools. They can look at the data for themselves and that they can see that the link has been broken between cases and hospitalisation and death.
And we were just talking about sort of things, you know, we're going to have to live with this virus in some sort of capacity, Steve. I mean, what needs to be done, what sort of strategically needs to be done going forward so that we can live a normal-ish life, but living with a virus essentially for the next few years?
So
really?
I'm hoping we can dispense with the ish. I hope it can be a really normal
That would
life.
be good.
Yeah, it really would. The main thing is, the two things I would say is the vaccinations have got to be kept on top of. You know, we've got to make sure we do have population immunity. And the other thing is going to be health service capacity, because I'm afraid there's now an enormous backlog. People need that health care. They need it desperately in some cases. So it's all going to be about health service capacity and management. But what we can't do is use our freedoms as a tool of that management.
No.
Just one other thing before we let you go. Let's show you this video. I'm sure you've already seen it, of what happened to Professor Chris Whitty in central London recently. Let's have a look.
Please, sorry. One photo, please.
One photo, mate.
One photo.
I'm going to change that.
So what we've been talking about this morning, are they essentially kind of misplaced men who maybe have had a few drinks and are trying to be friendly and have a selfie, or are they yobs who essentially assaulted Chris Whitty, and the police need to look at this?
Well, that's not the way to be friendly. I would condemn what they did, and I would say the police should look at it. I mean, I'm not an expert to comment on it, but that's clearly totally unacceptable. It must have been very frightening for Professor Whitty. Totally unacceptable. Never, should never happen.
Yeah, I mean, you clearly can see, obviously, the concern and him being... He is clearly frightened by it. And that leads on the question about... protection, because he's a very notable public figure.
Yeah, so some figures in public life do have police protection, notably prime ministers, former prime ministers, but we really don't want to get into a situation where you need police protection to be in public service in health. People should just not do stupid things. The police ought to look at that, and it should send a strong message to people. Don't harass public figures. Professor Whitty must have been frightened. I think he coped, admirably there, but it should never happen.